Hello and welcome to Context, where we discuss consequential subjects that in one way or another, directly or indirectly, will have some infinitesimal or measurably strong bearing upon all of us. And I'm Orkhan Amashov here to ask right questions so as to hear elucidating answers. There are those who would be eager to describe the so-called New World Order that US President Donald Trump is attempting to establish as a reincarnation of the old world order, reminiscent of the 19th century power politics, spheres of influence and pure transactionalism, with allied interactions viewed beyond rule-based configurations. Although we are nowhere near reaching the new might is right point in history, there are emergent signs of returning to fundamental essentiality, meant as a combination of those primal essentials that has always lied at the heart of humanity, to that very nasty and brutish competitiveness wherein human instincts of survival and need for domination so as to survive and thrive in one's present guise are so powerful that no rule and no precept, however lofty and admirably civilizational, is deemed as worthy of adherence or preservation. Yet one is somewhat compelled to consider the possibility that all that is happening cannot be explained simply by mere change in attitudes and ways of perpetuation of one's self-interest. In this way, this debate surrounding Greenland is one of great interest in terms of understanding the new US president's approach to global politics. On a whirlwind trip to Greenland, made apparently, albeit not so necessarily, in defiance of established diplomatic norms, US Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Denmark for not spending enough on security in the region, arguing that Copenhagen had not done a good job for the people of Greenland, thereby reinforcing President Trump's message that in one way or the other, the US will need to take control of the island. Beyond ostentatiously clever and presumptuously bombastic headlines such as the end of history, or even better, beginning of the end of the unthinkable, there's much to understand for what is to define our future, and that which will retrospectively be established as an explanation for our present is happening now. And it is in that now that is contained the key answers to some of the central questions of our time. And to discuss the shifting sands of the world order, its fundamental undercurrents, and more specifically the subject enveloping and revolving around Greenland, joining me now live is Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat, politician, a man of letters, scholar, the author of a number of books on foreign policy and the finer points of international law. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Ambassador,
we are living in interesting times. In one word, what is your sense of that which is happening now?
Well, back in December, when President Trump started receiving the briefings of the CIA and the rest of the national intelligence community of the United States, he started making some very worrying statements about the Panama Canal and about Greenland. A lot of people didn't really understand. Then J.D. Vance made it very clear yesterday, but some of us already saw it back then, almost 4 months ago, even 5. It was very obvious that with the change of the maritime routes because of climate change and the access that the Russian fleets will have to the North Atlantic, and the only real base that is really free to move their submarines and warships into the Atlantic and towards their rivals' waters is Murmansk and Polyarny. And definitely the Chinese could also use those Arctic waterways to go towards the west. But there is one major obstacle. There is, of course, the British Isles. There is Norway, now Sweden and Finland, that are members of NATO. The only one that has Arctic coasts is Norway. But then, of course, you have Iceland, that doesn't have a navy or an army, but does have a coast guard and is a member of NATO. And then, of course, Greenland. You cannot have access to the east coast of the United States or the east coast of Canada if you do not control Greenland. One thing is really striking is that the pretensions of President Trump of taking over Greenland have many obstacles. One, of course, is international law. Greenland is a part of the integrity and territorial integrity of Denmark. Even if it is an autonomous territory, it is a part of Denmark. This was the trick question of the 70s. which is the largest country in Western Europe. Everybody would say France, and in fact it's Denmark because of Greenland. And Greenland has recently elected a regional parliament that is more prone to independence, which is something that has worried profoundly the American establishment. They believe that if Greenland becomes an independent country, it will be prone and susceptible, vulnerable to the interference of Russia and of China. I don't think that Russia is going to go into the game. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has made it very clear. He said President Trump is completely resolute to take over Greenland. We are not going to do anything about it. We are going to share the Arctic wealth with them. The problem is not Russia right now. The problem here is China. Let's see how this unfolds. But in any case, I think that they're playing a hand of bad poker, if you allow me the metaphor. The United States has a base where J.D. Vance is right now as we speak, and that base is extremely important to the defense of the West in general and the United States in particular. It is there where the satellites that monitor IMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, have most of their monitoring systems. And the States could not do without it. The United States could not defend its national territory without that base and other bases. So I think that they are pushing their hand as far as they can to have a more favorable defense agreement on Greenland, maybe open one or two more bases, probably even a naval and an air force base.
And we understand that, as you mentioned yourself, Greenland is important for the United States. Perhaps, and it's perfectly legitimate for the US to aspire to achieve the control of the island for a number of very sound reasons, with the reasons themselves long been in gestation. Yet the very manner in which this is being articulated and substantiated appears to remind one of that very old adage that apparently inspired conquistadors, that there is a piece of land that is important, needs to be owned by someone, for security purposes, for the purpose of proper utilization of that land for security reasons. Someone should take care of that properly. And if the current proprietor is not doing the right thing, it's perfectly legitimate to step in and do the right thing. Do you find this element of connection to that form of reasoning?
You know, I am far from being an anti-American, very much the contrary. I have lived in the United States for a very long time. I work in the United States. I have friends in the United States. I think that the United States is by far the greatest country in the world for many, many reasons. It's the oldest democracy with its flaws and mistakes, as many have, but it is the oldest democracy in the world, no matter what people say. This said, international law and the rule of law and the submission of everyone and everybody to law, international or internal, is essential for civilization. It's essential for freedom. It's essential for democracy. I do believe that the United States have a legitimate concern over their security and the importance of Greenland. I do believe that it would be very interesting for the world in general and for the United States in particular to reach some kind of agreement with Denmark and Greenland to have a stronger military presence in the island. But this cannot be transformed into a bullyish form of trying to take over someone's land. And especially when the inhabited land don't seem very much in favor of this. So actually, not everybody in the United States agrees with the method. Everybody will agree that Greenland is essential to world peace today because have changed dramatically. As I said, climate change has changed everything, has changed geopolitics, has changed the routes of the Arctic, and this means that the North, even Canada, and the Canadians need to understand it also, are vulnerable that they were.
And moving into the realm of international financial system, to what extent do you think it will be central and essential for Trump to reset the international finance system to maintain US leadership and supremacy? which we already mentioned that they have sort of as legitimate grounds, and it's US President is talking about making the US the greatest civilization ever to exist in the history of human race, humankind. There has been some talk of a new financial accord in line with which the US dollar, viewed as a symbol and might of the US power, should be devalued for the purpose of making US exports more competitive and imports more expensive. And that will require some sort of cooperation from US allies. And effectively, US will divide international actors into two baskets. One will be friends and the second one will be enemies. Tariffs will be applied to enemies. Military protection will be provided for friends. What do you make of that debate, which is currently revolving around the US intentions?
Well, actually, it's up to everything. Let me start with a bit of hit. The President Donald Trump does not follow the steps of the great leaders of the 20th century. Those changed the Republican Party from a nationalist party into an international globalist powerhouse that actually built NATO, that built the transatlantic alliance, that built the alliance that stood up against the Soviet Union. I'm talking about General Eisenhower, who was the one who is the father of NATO, who is the father of the transatlantic alliance. I'm talking about Ronald Reagan, who is the champion of liberty, of free trade, of progress, of democracy in the east of Europe. All of you have democratic systems in Central Asia and the east of Europe, not only because of the will of your people that stood up against tyranny and wanted a democratic government, but because also there was somebody across the Atlantic that was trying to stop what they believed and what everybody knew to be a dreadful communist oppressive system. And Ronald Reagan said very clearly, tariffs and tariff wars and non-tariff commercial barriers are against liberty, are against freedom, are against progress, and are exactly the contradiction of the pillars upon which the United States of America, the Republic, its system, is built. So right now, if the United States wants to make a stronger economy for the United States, it can only do that if the rest of the world is prosperous. It can only do that if they sell their products to the rest of the world. If they make their products much more expensive because there's going to be retaliatory tariffs from the European Union, from the Chinese, from everybody. Look at the Canadians. 60% of the oil that the United States of America imports from abroad comes from Canada. And they are imposing tariffs on this oil. So what is going to happen to the gas station, to the man on the street, the guy that goes and is going to fill the tank of his car, of his truck? He's going to have to pay a lot more. The United States is not completely self-sufficient in energy today as we stand. It even imports refined products from other parts of the world because the consumption is huge. So right now, if you were to compare President Trump, you have to compare him to Edgar Hoover, who was the president of the United States that in 1925, 26, 27, 28, stopped tariff barriers and stopped free trade and free commerce. What was the consequence of the horrible, terrible, dreadful crack of 1929, the dreadful crisis of 1929 that ruined the world economy? And who changed this? It was obviously Eisenhower breaking the isolationism, the traditional isolationism, because it was President Reagan. There's one very important thing to when real free trade started, it was early months this century. Then the Eurozone and the United States had the same GDP per capita and the same GDP. Today, the United States, it's twice the size of the Eurozone. That should teach a lesson. It is free trade made that possible for the United States. Whatever the States thinks that is good for them, it's the exact opposite of a trade war.
And what is next for European allies of the United States, they're all very worried. Recently, I think Michael Gove is a famous British politician, used to be in the government as well in those days when the Conservatives were in charge. He said something interesting. He knows Trump very well, of course, in person. He said that in Trump's worldview, there are three emperors. He is one of them. Second one is Vladimir Putin, and third one is a leader of China. And he does not ascribe that degree of importance to Europe as a continent. What is the place of Europe in Trump's worldview?
Well, it's very much like the one that I heard from a very prominent Chinese Communist Party leader of Shanghai. This was told to a colleague of mine who was then the Spanish Consul General in Shanghai, who said that Europe would become, in the second half of the 21st century, the museum, the historic theme park, and the vacation grounds for the powerful, which is completely preposterous. Europe in general, and not just the European Union, we're talking about the Central Asian countries like yours, that part of this great organization that is Eurasia. We have contributed to world culture, to world economy, technology, to music, to philosophy, more than any other civilization in the world. And obviously Eurasia is an extremely important actor and should remain a very important actor. The normal future, logical thing to happen is that Russia starts down and it starts renouncing its aggressive expansionism, and that we build bridges again between us-minded people of Eurasia. And we build, should have been the case in 1991, an alliance between like-minded people, from to the Atlantic. So even if we are going to just cut the European Union, we're talking about 550 million people, richest nations in the world. Of course, the United States, but it is the second economy in the world. And it is the first and the most powerful investor regions in the world. If you combine the armies of even the neutral countries of the European Union, those that are members of NATO and those that are not members of NATO, are much, much larger than the Russian armed forces. And one thing that needs to be taken into account that is extremely important. Russia has the GDP roughly of Italy, a little more than Spain, and a little less than Italy. You cannot consider yourself a great power if you have an economy of that size. So if the United States, better said, if President Trump considers that Putin is an emperor, I think that he has it all wrong. Having 5,000 nuclear heads and a powerful military that has been stopped by a smaller country for 3 years, bravely defending itself from an aggression, doesn't prove that you have such a powerful armed force. On the other hand, you have a weak economy, resilient. Even if the sanctions haven't been able to really hurt the Russian economy, not the way. Cooperation is not the way. I think that we can stop the clock, resettle the rules, sit, try to build a more harmonious world. We need to do the same with China. China is not necessarily the enemy. China can become the enemy of the Russians. Let's not forget that Russia and China have 4,209 kilometers of border, 160 border crossings that are open 24 hours a day. There is a silent invasion happening from China into Russia. And in no time, the majority of the population of Siberia is going to be of Chinese origin. That is something that they need to consider. And what we need to do is what the Chinese people used to say, and the Chinese leaders of the Communist Party used to tell me when I was a member of parliament for 12 years. And I sat in my own home in Madrid with the member of the Politburo, who was the head of the international department of the Communist Party of China. He said, we want a harmonious China in a harmonious world. Well, the path that we are going, the world is walking through a very dangerous path, and it's definitely not going towards a harmonious world.
And what is also very staggering about Russia is that although geographically it's quite big, it's about, I think, 17 million square kilometers, big country, but only 143 million population, out of which 100 million live in the European part of the country. But that Asian section of Russia, which is massive and gargantuan, bordering with China, has got only 43 million population. And you talked about silent Chinese invasion, Ambassador. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm so grateful to you.
My pleasure to be with you as
Thank you very much indeed. This was Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat, politician, a man of letters, scholar, the author of a number of books on foreign policy and the finer points of international law we discussed. Latest developments revolving and surrounding the Greenland debate, US foreign policy designs, Russia, and many other related matters. See you very soon.